Hi, you're listening to Thoughtful Wellness Revolution, where we believe wellness isn't wellness if it's just for you. We're your hosts, Zahra and Hien. And before we get started, please make sure to give us a 5-star rating and review. Even though we're a podcast that believes in decolonizing, we're still bound to the algorithm. So every little bit that you can help us out, we really appreciate it. And we thank you for all the support. Let's get into it. Hey friends, today we're talking to our guest, Chichi Agorom, who is a writer and Enneagram teacher located in Los Angeles, California. So, Chichi, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Zahra. I am thinking today about the excitement of this week and of announcing my book being close to publication date and all of the love it's received so far. So I'm feeling excitement. I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety. I am feeling a sense of accomplishment and like openness to see what happens with this journey. But that's what's on my mind today.
Awesome. Lovely. Lovely. So that brings us into, could you tell us a little bit more about this book?
Yes, it's called The Enneagram for Black Liberation. Return to who you are beneath the armor you carry. I have it right next to me. And it is a book about our Enneagram types as armor. So how we utilize our type structures as a way to protect us from pain and suffering, and how we often confuse the fullness of who we are with these things that we do to survive. And so really my goal and my hope with the book is to be able to help people create space to start thinking of their types differently, thinking about their relationships with their types differently, I should say, create space between the type structure and the fullness of who I am, so that in that space I have access to more choice and freedom. I can determine when to use the armor because it's beneficial and when to put it down because I don't need it. But I am centering Black folks in this book, and especially Black women in this book, because in almost all of my training with the Enneagram, I was usually one of very few Black people in the room or people of color in a room. And I felt like there was so much around the teaching and the way that I was understanding the Enneagram that catered mostly to privilege and to those who are centered. For example, one of the conversations often is, there are two sides to it, but the side I'll focus on for just this portion is that, our types were necessary and beneficial for us in our formative years, but now as adults, like our goal is to really loosen the type and realize we don't really need it as much. And for people who are existing on the margins in our society, oftentimes those patterns of survival are still necessary. It's not just something I needed when I was 12. I still need it in certain situations today in my 30s. And so I felt like there was really a gap there in how it was being taught and how it was being talked about in terms of what serves people like me who still need my armor. What's my work then? How do I access freedom and choice while still needing to sometimes be armored in a world that requires that? What does vulnerability look like for me in a world in which I still need my armor sometimes, as opposed to this very binary conversation where vulnerability means no armor at all, which works again for people who are centered, but not often for those who hold marginalized identities. So that's kind of the overview of the book, and yeah.
Wow. Okay. I already pre-ordered the book. Obviously, I'm very excited for it. I love your work.
Thank you.
But hearing you explain it that way, one just reminds me like so much of like the beauty and the gifts of the type 4 to be able to see what's missing and bring that to the surface for everyone. And two, like, yes, this is such a thing within the Enneagram, and the way it's taught and the way it's understood is such a binary of you're either in your type or you don't know what you're doing, or you do and you're like, and it's not about like, oh, sometimes I have to choose to be in my type because it is protective or helpful or serves me and benefits me in some way. Oh my gosh, wow. Thank you for that beautiful explanation. So I guess this kind of brings me to ask the next question. And I feel like when I first was talking to Yen about you, I was like, oh, Chichi just shows so much joy on her Instagram page. Like you weren't super public and you weren't posting a lot, but when you were, it was just like, gosh, these moments of pure like, and there's the four tinge of like aesthetic and stuff, but joy of just like, you can feel it radiating. So I'd love to hear a bit about your journey with joy and its role, I guess, in how you wrote the book or came up with the book, or what you're sharing in your book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's such a great question. What is the role of joy? First of all, thank you for saying that about my Instagram presence. It's so interesting to me because this past year, 2021, has been or had been very difficult at times. And so I felt like I'm glad to know that I came across like I was embodying joy, because it really was a practice to not drown in the mess and in all of the stuff that was going on, both collectively and personally. And so I think one of the things that has been helpful for me, you asked about like the process of writing the book. And I think that I wrote it over the course of 6 months. I really tapped into a part of me that I credit my mother for. She is a one. And so I was definitely raised with that, attention to detail, structure, organization. She is still just now learning how to rest. So I tapped into that part of me for the writing of the book, and because I was like, if I just go based off of when the muses appear, this will never get done. And I signed a contract, so this has to get done. So I had like a schedule, these same days, sit at the same place for the same number of hours and write. But I think that in that process, what felt really joyful was being able to, knowing my own tendency to just kind of wait until inspiration strikes. It was very joyful to go back like every few weeks and be like, look at how many words I wrote. I really wrote 5,000 words this week. Wow. It was also really joyful to not write alone. So one of my very best friends is also a writer, and we kind of had like our little writers group. She's beginning her MFA, but was part of like a writers thing at the time. And so had some projects to work on. And we both talked about how often like the creative process, especially the writing process, is often very solitary and very lonely. And you're supposed to go into this cave and like create something and then come out and show everybody. But it was so much more fun doing it with her. So I think maybe 2 out of the 3 times, I think so, each week where I would write with her, and we would just sit on Zoom like this and we'd chat for like a few minutes, but then mute ourselves and just work together and then like check in a couple times. And it just felt so, like there are moments where I would say, hey, can I ask you about this concept that I'm writing about that I'm not sure if it makes sense, and bounce ideas off of each other. And that felt really joyful to invite somebody else into my creative process, because in many other ways I've done it alone in the past. I've always written alone. I also write music. I tend to do that alone. So it felt really joyful to have that be collaborative. And then to the other part of your question, I wrote down the I don't know what you would call it, like the theme or the main goal of my book on a piece of paper, and I put that on my desk where I could see it every day with like big letters. And joy was one of them, like our collective joy and liberation and ease. And in the moments where I was writing and my inner critic was really loud and I felt like a fraud, and it was mostly closer to the end when it was like, okay, I'm going to turn in the final manuscript. And it was like, who wants to read this? Who says you have anything to say? What if this isn't good enough? My type structure was very loud there with what's missing, what's not enough here. And I used joy as a way to center myself back to the reality of this is just, this will be the first, as far as I know, unless something else comes out between now and March. This will be the first book in like the Enneagram canon of literature that is written by a Black person for Black people. And while that is terrifying in some ways, in other ways, it's really exciting and it gives me a lot of joy. And also when I think about it or allow myself to experience it from more so the joy-centered portion, it reminds me that it's not my work to say all the things or know all the things or write all the things. This is the first, meaning that there'll be many more. So I'm just going to focus on what my work is, which is this portion of it that I have, written about. But yeah, overall, I would say joy is a true practice for me because I'm very aware. My attention naturally will go to what is difficult. I think that since the pandemic began, one of the things I have been learning personally is to release my attachment to the story of suffering as connected to meaning. So for something to be meaningful, it has to be difficult. For it to be meaningful, I have to suffer in some way. And I think maybe just being thrust into this enormous collective suffering was like the wake up call for me and my personal, like my type tendency to attach to that story. And so I've been working on releasing that narrative and allowing joy to be just as meaningful as pain. So I'm glad that comes across.
I just want to say, thank you so much for, sharing everything and talking about kind of seeing joy as meaningful. I'm also a 4 and I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, I should be taking notes, but I'm gonna have this recording and we're gonna have the transcript and everything. But I just feel like that's so helpful because I think joy is hard for me because I also feel like I go towards, I don't know, despair a lot more easy. And I'm curious to know for you, how do you know when you're feeling joy? Because I think for me, it feels very fleeting. And sometimes I don't even think I noticed it till afterwards. Where I was like, oh yeah, I was actually really happy. When I was, I don't know, talking to Zahra earlier this week or something. And I didn't even register that. Because after that conversation, I go back to being upset about the world or being disappointed in something.
Yes. That's such a good question. This reminds me of one of my favorite nerdy stats, which I also put in my book, which is that it takes our bodies a nanosecond to process negative information, in whatever form, whether it's criticism, whether it's whatever it is. But negative information, instantly sticks. Positive, it takes at least 11 seconds. So if I said, you look beautiful today, and you said, oh, thank you. So how about blah, 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 move on really quickly, which we tend to do. It doesn't really stick, but the pausing to actually allow the integration of whatever the good, whatever the positive is a good practice for me to allow myself to be in the experience of joy, in the experience of, positivity, whatever that looks like. But I would say that the way that I know is through my body. It's when I'm experiencing joy, I feel energy in the parts of like my hands and my feet and my face, where I feel like when my 4-ness is in the driver's seat, a lot of my energy is kind of in this heart, chest area, diaphragm area, and I kind of forget that I have limbs. But with joy, I'll give you an example. Last night I had like a first as an author. I took a copy of my book to my favorite LA bookstore and asked if they would read it and stock their shelves with it and maybe do an event with me. And she loved it. It was great. It was awesome. I got to witness two Black women like excited about my book in real time and like, going through the pages and screaming about it. And I walked out of the bookstore and just like flailed around like a crazy person for probably 5 minutes. And even after I got home, like 20 minutes later, I still was like, I would be trying to do something else, but I'm like, my face is still in a smile and my chest feels warm and I feel really, I don't know, it's just such a body or embodied experience for me when I'm feeling joy, and it doesn't feel like my head is doing a lot. Like I'm not telling myself, oh, this is a good thing. It's just my body being like, this feels like delicious energy that we want to hold on to. And to your point of it being fleeting, of course, it's not a constant state, right? But it feels so good. And I'm making a practice to recognize how good it feels so that when despair starts sounding appealing again, I'm like, well, there's something a little sweeter. It's not, this is, I know what you're trying to lure me back into, but have you tried joy? Because it's really fun. So,
Thank you.
and the last thing I was going to say about that actually too, is that it doesn't feel, one of the things that I think is really important is making the distinction, especially if we're like talking about wellness, for example, the distinction between optimism and joy, which we see probably most clearly with like Enneagram 7s. And I personally think that type encapsulates Black American culture. But optimism to me is like this determination to see things the way you want them to be. Whereas with joy, it's an invitation to be in reality.
Wow, you're
right?
blowing my mind. You're telling me that joy is an invitation to see reality? Because I'm used to thinking that's despair or seeing it from the lens of despair. So, wow, thank you. That is like such a gem that you just dropped there that I'm just like, I need to sit with that and practice that.
Thank you.
Wow. I am just constantly amazed by what you're saying. I'm be like, I almost said like, you should write a book, but we are here talking about your book.
I did.
And for our listeners, that book comes out when?
It will be out March 29th, 2022, everywhere books are found. And yeah, you should. It's available for pre-order now. I know this won't be out till February, but it's already available for pre-order. And then we'll be shipping out / physical copies will be available March 29th.
Perfect. So when you are listening to this, the book will probably maybe be just about out or will be out. And we would love if you check it out because it sounds amazing. And I'm sure it's filled with more wisdom. I have a question that is something we don't have time for, but are you, I'm curious, are you still working in therapy as a therapist?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Blessed, because I was going to ask how that has been throughout the pandemic.
It's interesting actually to think about that in connection to your question about joy, because the start of the pandemic in 2020, when we were all naive little babies, didn't know what was coming. It was like, oh, this is going to be like a few months. And then we had that summer with the uprisings and the protests, and a lot of, I would say like maybe 85% of the clients I was seeing at the time were Black folks, and holding space for that sort of collective trauma while experiencing it myself, both in terms of like the pandemic, but then also all the other things that were going on in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement and like the murder of Black folks on, on TV. It was a lot. And I realized that I'm really good at sitting with people and holding space and all of that. And it's really meaningful work. But it was not bringing me joy. It felt incredibly heavy and difficult. And it was, now thinking about it in retrospect, I feel like was probably the start of this same theme that I'm continuing with in my personal life of trying to honor joy as just as meaningful as suffering, because it felt like suffering. And I was good at what I did. And it was still meaningful and positive in those people's lives. But for my own like wellness, it just felt like I have to put my mask on first. And I think that means stepping away for a bit to like reground myself in hope and joy and care and softness, and be responsible for that for me without also being responsible for 30 other people. So yeah, maybe someday in the future I will return to it. But I also really love the idea of exploring other ways to be with people in those sorts of healing spaces in a more collaborative, collective way. Because I think often like healing and wellness is talked about as this individual responsibility. It's your responsibility to figure out what's wrong with you and heal. Meanwhile, we're all impacted by the systems that we exist in. And so I don't think that healing is individual work. I think it's collective work. And so I would love to explore other ways to do that. I am exploring other ways to do that other than just one-on-one talk therapy. So.
Well, we absolutely love that you said that, because our tagline for this podcast, which I'm sure everyone is so sick of hearing as our listeners, but you will be excited for, is wellness isn't wellness if it's just for you.
Yes.
Like it doesn't count if it doesn't consider how systematically we're all being oppressed and marginalized folks are being oppressed. Like it's stressful. That's not wellness. That's Eunice. So I want to be mindful of our time here, Hien. Should we go ahead with our last? So we always end by asking people, our guests, just random people, we pick them. We always end by asking our guests, what's one thing you want to see more of in wellness, and what's one thing you want to see less of in wellness?
I think one thing I would love to see more of is that collective understanding that our healing and wellness and freedom is interconnected. And for us to really, I would love to, because I don't even know what that, I try to imagine what a world like that could look like, but I have never lived in such a world. And so, and I know that that's part of the invitation, right? That's part of the work, is to use our collective imagination to expand beyond what we have known so far. But I would love to see more of that in those kinds of conversations around wellness and around healing and thriving. And what I would like to see less of, I mean, I feel like it's a cop out to say like the opposite of what I just said, but I think maybe to be more specific, something I would love to see less of is the commodifying of wellness, or like the way that capitalism has infiltrated everything, but also wellness in the sense of, but specific to that, I mean, how within capitalism, everything is a means to an end. And so we've taken that towards our own wellness and growth, where if I'm going to rest or I'm going to take care of myself, it's so that I can show up better for work, or so that I can, be there can be better output. And I would love to see less of that, because we're not machinery and this is not a means to an end, right? The end is the process is us growing into fuller thriving and healing and rest and ease and all that, as opposed to I do that so that I can produce more, or so that I can be seen better, or so that I can, whatever the case may be. So yeah, I would love to see less memes that are like, rest is actually productive, so that you can like come back and do more work. Like, no, you don't get it. You don't get it at all. No.
Yes, I absolutely love that. I've been finding rest to be a challenge for myself as well. And so I like making it not a productive thing. And it's really been life-changing to not do that. So yeah, we're gonna wrap up our episode here, right, Hien?
Yeah. Can you tell us how people can get in touch with you?
Thank you.
Yeah. You can follow along on Instagram at the Enneagram for Black Liberation. And you can also find me at chichiagorom.com.
Thank you so much, Chichi, for sharing everything that you did with us. I am definitely so excited for your book. So this is our post interview with Chichi. And Zahra, I am so emotional in the best way, because she blew my mind in the best way, coming from a 4, listening to another 4 talk. I'm just no words.
I agree. I mean, I think we've had so many great guests. I have not teared up on any of them except for today's. And yeah. So I'm curious about your thoughts as a 4. What's on your mind today and post interview?
All right. So I'm just going to go be real with y'all, because that's the point of why we are here, is to be real with you all. Is that, I have been feeling really depressed this week. And, today was one of those days where I got up kind of late and I went for a walk at the park. And then I came home to do this podcast with Zahra, which, I always find joy and inspiration in, but feeling a little bit more kind of nervous, maybe like just feeling more low energy and feeling a little bit like, I don't know how this is going to go. And also feeling like, oh shit, Chichi is so cool. And she's also a 4, like the weird 4-ness thing that I get into with like comparison or whatever. And then we meet Chichi, and Chichi starts talking. And I just feel like there is such, I don't know how to explain it, but I just feel like I was able to be vulnerable, even though, it's her talking as our guest. And so, I mean, when you think about usually who's more vulnerable on a podcast, it's probably usually more the guests, right? Because they're there to share their story and like all the things they've been up to, which Chichi did today. But I felt like even as the podcast host, I felt like I was able to feel vulnerable and disarmed. And I find that so interesting and feels really good, I guess. Like it feels really good to say I'm vulnerable enough to admit that I've been really depressed this week, and had this really beautiful conversation with a 4 where she talked about joy. And I'm thinking about my own joy in my life, which, in this moment, I'm going to take my 11 seconds, as she says, and just kind of feel that joy. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, well, that's also like a testament, I think, to Chichi and people, her doing her work and anyone doing their Enneagram work, and like really just like the ability to embody the highest parts of yourself, like the equanimity, I think is really beautiful. And just, you can tell, I mean, listeners, if you don't follow Chichi's Substack and like her writing, it's really beautiful. And I think one of the gifts of being able to tell a story is being able to disarm people and hold them in a space, right? And I think she did such a great job of that, of just being herself and coming into the space vulnerably, that it made it so open for us to be vulnerable as well. And not that we're coming on this podcast with like walls up and, you know, trying to hide who we are. But I think as interviewers, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, how am I gonna ask a question about this, or what am I thinking about this, versus how am I feeling about this, right? And I think we talk about this in our bonus episode. So if you aren't subscribed, you should go check it out on our Substack. But feelings aren't an emergency, right? And so it's like, you know, when you're doing a job, it's easy to be like, oh, like what I'm feeling right now isn't important. But when we create soft spaces and vulnerable spaces in people who do that, I think it's really beautiful and wonderful. And yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation. I'm rambling a bit.
No, I love it. Oh my gosh, Zahra, I love it when you ramble. Like, please ramble, because like right now I'm just really in my feels, and it's really interesting because I can tell that Chichi is, I mean, it's no surprise. She's a space holder. You know, she has a therapy background. Because I felt, you know, similarly with everything you're saying, like as the podcast host, we're the ones holding space for our guests, but I also felt like she held space for us, which is why, again, I'm in this place where I feel emotional and vulnerable, but in a really beautiful way. And I just can't wait for everything that she does. Like I can just tell that look at this. I'm like a 4 saying this about another 4. So it's kind of funny, but I'm like, she's so special. Like what she is doing is so beautiful and special. And I just really want to like underline that and highlight that. I mean, that's the point of our podcast, right? It's having all these people on where we just like, you know, root for them and support them. But I just feel very strongly, maybe because it's that 4, like the connect 4 thing. And I just feel that so much right now. And it feels nice to feel that way. Like it feels nice as a 4 who often goes into despair, who has been really depressed this week. It feels good to see someone in the world and think like, yeah, like I really support your work and I'm excited for something, because it's getting harder and harder for me to find things to be excited about, I'll be
honest. Truthfully, I feel that so deeply. I feel like I'm less in that space right now because I started like a new group, or you know what I mean? So I'm on that like, oh, there's a new thing, but like underneath the surface, it's bubbling because everything is so stressful right now. And it is hard, everyone.
Yeah, we're still talking. We're like we're on January 14th, 2022 right now. So for context of the timeline, like for context.
Yeah. It's hard to not get caught up in things because of the heaviness of so much going on around. And I think you're also in a cold place where cold things happen. And that makes, I guess, people want to be outside less. I don't go to cold places because I don't like to be outside. And I'm assuming that's why other people don't like it either. So it also makes it hard where it's just like, yeah, there's just, I had fur in my mouth, not fur, like not animal fur, like blanket fur. Sorry, everyone.
Okay, I was like, what? I was thinking like, was it your dog? You have your dog's hair in your mouth or something? Because I saw your dog was going to you earlier, so.
No. Also, I forgot to tell everyone what's on my mind. Because I don't really know.
I'm sorry, I always forget to ask. Like I realize I should be better on that.
I forget how to introduce things on the podcast other than the initial thing I know I'm supposed to say every time. So it's fine. That's, listeners, you're hearing. This is the reality of it all. And I think that's really beautiful and wonderful. What's going on with me? Honestly, I'm having a chronically in pain, disabled illness issue recently, and I would just like to find specific positions to sit in and be in that are not painful. If you've seen me in the video, I'm like constantly doing this with like my shoulders, my neck. So it's, I guess, frustrating to feel, wow, I guess we are being vulnerable today. Look at what
we're
Chichi
super
does.
vulnerable today.
Yeah. So it's hard to feel excited about things and have things to feel excited about, and still everything is hard. That feels hard. Because life is hard, like not like out for everyone, because the world, but also, yeah, chronic illness things are hard. Yeah. Oof. We're not putting our armor back on. That is just the truth of where I am, friends. And if that made you feel uncomfortable, I am apologetic for you. I'm not sorry about what I said, because it is real and we're making space for softness. Yeah.
This is
So,
it. This
yeah.
is definitely the practice, because how it's interesting, because even though we're in this very vulnerable moment, I did for a second in my head also think, oh shit, how can we end this in a way that feels silver liney, you know, or that feels whatever, like more polished and whatnot. But like the truth is, that's just not where we're at today. Like Zahra and Hien are going through it. And you know what? If you are too, that's okay. Hang on. We love you. Thank you for listening. And we'll get through this together.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe let's close out on the note of, Hien, I am so grateful for you. Listeners, we are so grateful for you. And Hien, if you can say that you're so grateful for me, we'll take it and we'll close it out for our 11 seconds.
Zahra, I am so grateful for you in a way that I can't even explain, but just deeply grateful. And you know that. And also very grateful for everyone here who's listening.
Yeah, thank you. Also, let's just add, I'm not a 2 fishing for compliments. I just truly wanted it to close out the circle. Thank you all.
Thank you for listening to the Thoughtful Wellness Revolution podcast. For bonus content, you can go to thoughtfulwellnessrevolution.substack.com and subscribe for $5 a month. You can also follow us on Instagram at Thoughtful Wellness Revolution to share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you're listening.